everyone, welcome on the Barricades. My name is Boyan Stanislavski and I will be your host today. I invited to today's show Bozhin Traykov and Arto Artinian, who are friends of the show, but also Bulgarian political commentators and analysts. Welcome to the show and thanks for taking time again to join us today.
Thank you, Boyan.
We are recording it on Tuesday, which is February 27th. And yesterday we had this meeting in Paris. You know, we were not sure what's actually going to be coming out of this meeting, if anything. But the fact of the matter that it was organized in such an impromptu manner. Everybody rushed to Paris or joined via Zoom or in or via any other platform, just online to discuss the situation in Ukraine. And what was pretty revealing about this meeting was the statement made by Robert Fico, the Social Democratic Prime Minister of Slovakia, who prior to the meeting went out to speak to journalists, and he said, "Look, there are plans to create a situation, or there are plans to send troops from NATO countries to Ukraine to fight the Russians there. And I want to say, I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember everything exactly, but he said something like, I promise you that I will do everything in my power to prevent any Slovak soldier ever going to fight in this war, even at the cost of my position as a prime minister," or something like that. But he was clear about the fact that he's going to go all the way down, and he will do everything that definitely, he can do a lot because he's the prime minister of Slovakia in the final aftermath, which is politically speaking the strongest position that you can have in the Slovak political architecture. So he can prevent that. But even if that would mean that he would not be a prime minister anymore, if he'd lose elections or something like that, he'd still prevent that. And I think it was pretty unique. And also the Polish prime minister, late in the evening yesterday, he came out and said that, yes, there was this discussion about sending troops to Ukraine, but there was no decision. And he stressed on that a couple of times. No decision was taken. And there is no consensus on that. He also said this.
If the prime minister of Slovakia, who just came to power with a decisive sort of like election, basically showing that there is quite popular support for his government and for the course that the government is taking, if he is saying with the cost of my resignation or with the cost of me not staying as a prime and being a prime minister, that kind of hints to the fact that he is outright stating that there might be pressure on part of forces, and we know which forces, on part of the United States to foment some kind of civil society uprising, in quotes, something that is very, very well-known tactic of United States foreign policy to enforce their objectives, the geopolitical objectives, and has been throughout, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then kind of like promotion of these civil society NGOs that then can serve as some kind of a catalyst of this sort of conflict, inner conflict within society to oust a government that is not desirable. That's what it sounds to me if he stated something like that he's worried that this might be an outcome of the resistance of Slovakia to not complying. The other thing that really strikes me is EU's posturing as some kind of decision maker. Macron's posturing as some kind of decision maker when it comes to this war. And we all know that this war basically...
Does anyone believe that? Does anyone believe that he can take decisions?
We know who the decision makers are. And if there is a European kind of superpower that also could claim some sort of decision that is at the front of decision making, that would be Britain, right? That wouldn't be France. That would be Britain. That would be so. I am not really certain what kind of like whether this is again tactic of the United States to shift the focus from their own kind of situation with the funding conundrum there, and the Republicans' refusal to fund the war anymore with in relation to the upcoming elections in the United States, and shift the focus towards Europe. And when it comes to Bulgaria, what can I say? I mean, this is a vassal situation. This is basically, I mean, as we have been talking about all the time, highly unpopular government. I don't know if now the percentage of supporters of this government is even higher than 20. It was something less than 20% support the current decisions of the government.
So more or less like Biden, the level of Biden levels of popularity, I would say.
Wow, I think even worse than that. I mean, I really agree with the commentator that said that this is the government. Basically, he was rephrasing Roosevelt's famous, he might be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch when it comes to Batista. And Batista was a general, and Boyko Borisov, who was the former prime minister and now key figure in this so-called coalition, is also a general. He's been groomed like some Batista figure here for many years, and so the reaction of the Bulgarian government will always be is like, we will do whatever the bosses are deciding. So now Denkov's reaction was that they are considering the prime minister of Bulgaria, the current prime minister of Bulgaria, basically stated that basically, since there was no unilateral decision made, and thank God, like that on part of the EU for sending troops, and of course that is not going to be the case because there is no unilateral kind of like agreement in the European Union about this war. We have Slovakia, we have Hungary, we have to some extent Croatia, so not everyone is on board with this war. Some of these smaller states try to kind of maneuver and implement some sort of national, to follow the nation, like to politics that we can kind of loosely say following the national interest, whatever that means, but being more independent. Bulgaria is not the case. But nevertheless, it will really depend, I think, now on how fearful this government is of the silent majority, because so far the majority is silent, right, here in Bulgaria. There hasn't been any mobilization of major resistance to these current follies of the government, because I wouldn't even consider it policies. It's a series of craziness, a series of highly unpopular decisions, both on the economic side of things and cultural side of things and political side of things. Clearly, a government does not care about the interest of the majority of the population here. We will probably discuss the refugee situation as well. But what I want to point out is Denkov is talking because of this impossibility to make unilateral decision in the EU. Now, of course, there has been this push towards like two-sided agreements, like Ukraine signing an agreement with another country from the EU, which could include sending
and NATO.
NATO countries that will be not acting as the NATO bloc, which of course is a coalition, a form of coalition of the willing, like some form of a coalition of a willing. That's what the Americans are I think this is coming from them.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is going to be more of a coalition of suckers, really. I mean, those who are not able to resist even sending them into the grinding machine. Arto, let me hear your take. What do you think about the meeting in France? What do you think about Bulgarian reactions? Possible potential Bulgarian reactions?
Well, it's very interesting. The meeting, only one of the major European powers actually made a statement, and that was the French, as Bozhin said, president, because France is a nuclear power. And he said something very strange, because he said, I'm not ruling out that French troops will enter the war in Ukraine, which I think would be the first time since Napoleon's time that the French have actually exercised muscle, which they don't have, clearly. The French are probably the most mediocre of the nuclear powers in the world in terms of their military might. I mean, the French are not known, the French military doesn't have a very high reputation, period, since Napoleon's time, arguably. But these are just side points. And then immediately after Macron said that the French might enter the war against Russia, that all of these other European Union presidents and prime ministers said the opposite, including, I think, Poland, Germany significantly, and a number of smaller countries. So clearly that means, one, maybe there is infighting between the European Union members on this question, and the French, through their idiotic president, has said one thing, but then 9 or 10 other European Union members have said the opposite. So clearly maybe there is some kind of an internal fighting going on. So I think, how do we make sense of what Macron's statement, and then we can go to the possible Bulgarian interpretation. I think, one, it could mean that this person is truly unhinged, that the French government on some level is really run, as Putin has said a number of times, by a bunch of completely incompetent idiots. That's a possibility, in which case we are in deep trouble, because that means that a nuclear power is at the hands of incredibly delusional people who have no idea of what's going on. The other possibility is that this is a signal by NATO, by the United States through its proxy servants, for example, the French government, that basically is indicating that there are some deals maybe being made explicitly or implicitly between NATO, the United States, i.e., and Russia, meaning for the division of Ukraine as a way of ending the war. And people have commented about this on and off throughout the war, is that people from the West actually have indicated hypotheses as maybe the war will end with the division of Ukraine along the Dnieper River, with the eastern part becoming part of Russia, and then the western part becoming Ukraine, but also not excluding the possibility that Poland will reclaim western provinces of Ukraine, and Romania will reclaim.
Which I think, and sorry, I just want to throw that in here, because I've heard that, this argument or this statement or this thesis repeated on many other channels by many other people. So I just want to make it clear here that Poland is only going to do that if it is ordered to do that, not even allowed. It has to be ordered to do that. Otherwise, I think no one would even dare thinking practically about doing something like that. But this is just, a view from Poland on those matters. Okay.
Right. So the possibility that an order is going to be made exists, probably. I mean, we're speculating, but there is likely that maybe this order will be made as a way of ending the war. Of course, that's just one possibility. The third possibility, I think, is that NATO has realized that the Russian government will probably not end the war with the Dnieper River, and it will probably continue until all of Ukraine is, because recently there was a statement made, I forget who made it exactly. Was it the Speaker of the Russian Parliament or somebody who said something like the possibility that the Ukrainian state will be dismantled exists as long as the Ukrainian state consists of the current government. So either way, these are three possibilities I think that the Macron statement possibly could refer to. And the fourth possibility is the worst possibility, which is the United States, through its NATO proxies, has decided to take a course on World War III, including nuclear war. And that would mean the use of the French military and any other militaries in NATO that are forced to officially enter Ukraine, either as official militaries or as volunteers. And then that will, as the Russian government has indicated, that would precipitate a full-out nuclear war because the Russians are clearly outnumbered by all of NATO. And they have said that if that happens, this will result in a nuclear war where the European Union will be targeted, as will be the United States and Russia. And then that would probably mean the end of human life as we know it, at least in Europe, in the United States, and in Russia, in large parts of the world. So I think those are the four possibilities. Hopefully, none of them will take place, and the war will, end somehow as soon as possible without nuclear war. Obviously, is the
sure. I mean, yeah, let's hope it ends as soon as possible, because we've had like hundreds of thousands of people, who died in this war, and most of them, majority of them, on the Ukrainian side, and there are suggestions, speculations that it could be even around 500,000 people dead, or either killed or wounded, or like people who are not going to go back to life at all, or to the kind of normal life or the life that they used to know.
But I think the Bulgarian response, I haven't really heard anything official. I mean, but I've spoken to my friends, and I think if the decision is made that Bulgaria must enter the war in Ukraine, then the practical question is how. Well, the first answer is by using the military, but Bulgaria doesn't, for practical intents and purposes, doesn't really have a military. The military is under 30,000 people officially. It has about 80 tanks, which are basically unmodernized since the Soviet socialist period in the late 80s. So if Bulgaria is asked to contribute troops, then it would contribute, I think, 3 or 4 brigades. That would probably be 15,000, 14, 12,000 soldiers, which on the scale of the Russia-NATO war, that's an insignificant amount of people. And then the question happens, what happens after that? If Bulgaria is
really happens whether they will want to go. The question is whether they will want to go.
First of all, are they going to want to go? But let's assume they will go, right? Which is, I don't think they're going to go, but let's assume they go. Then the next question is, they're going to have to the Bulgarian government has to institute a draft. Now, most Bulgarian men who are young, like 18 to 30, have not gone through military service, because there is no conscription in Bulgarian military for a while now. So there is no pool of trained Bulgarians who are military capable of any sort, except old people from their mid to late 40s onward. People past their military prime, fighting age. So the question is, who are you going to mobilize? Well, of course, they can mobilize young people in their mid-20s, mid-30s. This would have to be probably done by force, because the volunteers who are going to go are going to go. But the vast majority of Bulgarians, we know from sociological surveys in the last year or two, 80% or so are firmly not in support of the NATO position in this war in Bulgaria. So that means most of the men who you are going to recruit are going to be pro-Russian. So good luck with that mobilization. It's not going to happen. I just don't see it happening in numbers that will significantly produce significant numbers from Bulgarian population. So I don't think it's going to happen. They probably could try, but the results are going to be open, and I don't think they're going to be good from the point of view of the NATO strategist. So I think Bulgaria is not going to be a good place to recruit soldiers for this.
No, but I sorry to interrupt you here, but I think it's an important point. We might discuss that briefly, because look, I don't think even Poland is a good field right now, is a good place to make this kind of recruitment. I mean, the fact that the Polish president, who's so hawkish against Russia and so firmly in support of Ukraine, even he had to come out and stress, when talking to journalists a couple of times, he had to make it clear that no consensus exists in terms of sending troops to Ukraine. There are ideas, but there certainly is no consensus. And, thus he made it clear that he is against that too. So if we get Andrzej Duda, the Polish president, and I say again, one of the most hawkish politicians in Eastern Europe, and I would claim in the world, hawkish against Russia, just obsessively wanting to take down its government, when he goes out and says something like that, then I think that it's a clear indication that even the Polish politicians are afraid that this kind of move could actually trigger a massive change in the public. I mean, massive change in terms of like now everything's great. We support Ukraine. We receive the refugees. You know, we send them arms. We send them money. We send them everything. We're the good guys, and you know they're not even thankful, by the way, because this is also an element of this of the current Polish political, let's say, process life and so on and so forth. So, you know, they just want to position themselves as the good people, the great nation that helps, supports, does, you know, is on the right side of history. But once things start to get thick, really dense, in a sense that, you know, okay, so yeah, like we are supporting Ukraine, we are against Russia, let's do something more substantial now. Then I think this candy coated sort of attitude, so to say, might simply change from day to day. And I think they're afraid of that. And I think more, they are even afraid of potential revolt. I mean, I'm not saying a massive, you know, revolutionary force kind of wiping out the current powers that be, or anything like that. But I'm talking about some kind of revolt. Now they are already in trouble because of the farmers' revolt. So, you know, add on top of that this kind of trouble that it could stir, and you know, and you're really in deep, you know where, right? So this is I would say, you know, if you can say that about Poland, then you can say that 100 times more intensely about Bulgaria. What do you think, Bozhin?
I don't know if in terms of the comparison, in terms of who is more hawkish now, the Polish Prime Minister or the so-called Bulgarian kind of like I don't know, Euro-Atlanticians, you know, as they call themselves. And maybe in the case of the Polish one, it is sincere, whereas here I think that it's kind of known that in Bulgaria, wherever the wind starts blowing, whichever direction the wind is blowing, you know, they become you know, more righteous than the Pope themselves, as the saying goes, right? Like so I don't know what we can say about the sincerity of the current government. To me, it's obvious that this government is a construction of the American embassy, which everyone knows here. Every commentator has been pointing that out. It is also construction based on corruptive practices, in the sense that the level of embezzlement and the level of economic crimes is extremely high right now, in terms of the various kind of circles of business groups, business circles around the certain members of the so-called coalition, you know, related to the two of the parties in the coalition. GERB, which is also part of the coalition, they have already had their chance for 12 years to kind of practice, you know, to enrich themselves in the process of, you know, plundering the various resources of the state. Now we have these two new parties. So that's what keeps them together. Whether there is ideology that keeps them together, it's most likely the kind of ideological architects. For example, people like there is a certain figure who is quite influential throughout for Eastern Europe, Ivan Kristev, the person who kind of is like considered to be behind the scenes, the person who is kind of maybe the architect of these current Euro-Atlantic governments. It's possible that when it comes to the ideological side of things, this is the sort of advisor, the hidden advisor. But whether the Bulgarian government will go as far as directly confronting Russia, it's why should we exclude that? We are already in this war. We are already as strong supporters of the Ukrainians, sending weapons, to the Ukrainians, we are already involved in the conflict. So whether there's going to be another escalation with, let's say, volunteer troops or draft, I don't know if it will get to the draft. But when things escalate, they escalate. So it might start with volunteers. It might start with like some with a few platoons here and there, and all of a sudden, when things escalate, they might escalate. Now, the other thing that I'm wondering though is if there is a direct confrontation with Russia, aggressive confrontation with Russia, whether in part of the European Union or part of countries in the European Union, with involvement of the United States or without, how will China react to that? That is something that I'm interested in. I don't think that China will be idle in this case. If there is some kind of like direct, attempt to escalate this war outside of the border of Ukraine.
Yes, they would be willing to escalate that at the expense of, the European Union, the European Union nations, the Eastern Europe, if you like, at the expense of Bulgaria, Poland, and so on and so forth. I think they would be prepared to do that for as long as they don't have to send directly American troops to fight in Ukraine, because that would definitely, end world civilization, humanity, and everything. Because, well, we know where it's going, as Arto pointed out. But also, the comparison that I wanted to draw between Poland and Bulgaria is the fact that if the situation is like in Poland, politicians are afraid of the reaction of the public to this kind of change of the modus operandi, then I think that for Bulgaria, it's 100 times more like it. And I wonder, Arto, if you see it the same way, and regardless of whether you see it the same way or in a different way, then please comment on that. But also tell me, because we've recently had this visit by the Bulgarian Prime Minister, Nikolai Denkov, who went to Kiev, and I have no idea why did he do that. Like, what's the point? Like, how could Bulgaria in any way support Ukraine more than it already does against the will of its own nation? By the way, so yeah, please go ahead.
Oh well, I mean, on the question, I agree that if the Polish president publicly said this, maybe there is a disagreement with the French president, and in Bulgaria it would be 100 times more of a political crisis if this decision was made to go to war. I don't think the American capitalist class is necessarily very eager to participate in a nuclear war because they're doing just fine. I mean, they are multiplying, accumulating more wealth through the currently existing system, and the weakening of the European Union, particularly Germany. So I find it hard to believe that the U.S. political elites would permit the U.S. government that to engage in a course of nuclear war with Russia. And although I think the possibility exists that maybe some of them do hope that they can, if they precipitate the use of nuclear weapons, they would be reserved only for Europe, and in thus sense, some kind of a further strategy for enriching their power relative the European Union's kind of. Of course, this is a difficult conversation because it assumes that the European political elites, the European capitalist class, wealth owning class, has interests that are different from the American or against American. There is some competition, but I think we have to distinguish when we talk about the global capitalist class. We have to talk about, because they're also split, as we see from the Trump versus the Democrats' power struggle, between the capitalist class that is clearly globalist in its orientation in a particular way, usually associated with financiers, bank owners, investment conglomerate owners who see the nation. Today, these could be associated with the liberal camp of capitalist ideology, who think that ideas like countries, nation states, nationalities are outdated concepts of 18th, 19th century politics, and they need to be gone away with, and they want to live in a world where there's no borders. I mean, this is part of the ideology of free movement of capital goods, right? Capital must move freely. Everything else doesn't have to move freely if it's not related to capital movement. So I think there's one faction of the capitalist class, which is globalist, if you want to call them in that sense. They are the big supporters of the ongoing tech, internet technology-based transformation of human life, where they're starting to blur, technology will be used to improve humans, these biological things that are inferior, they have emotions, they have all these things that we need to get rid of. These are the real racists of today. These are the new Nazis of today. The Nazis didn't use, in many ways, the Nazis were more moderate in their kind of totalitarian view of control over the human body. So I think that's the prime danger, in my view, that the world is facing, is to basically not permit this tiny group that's highly organized globally. They have representatives in every country in the world. They meet in the Klaus Schwab, who's the public face of this. He's not the brains behind this because he's not that smart, but the World Economic Forum is just a visible part coordinating mechanism where global elites of this type are cultivated and indoctrinated. They choose young people to become the next prime ministers. This is where Annalena Baerbock, that absurdity, was trained before she became, a politician, and etc. So I think against them is the kind of the older fashioned capitalist class represented in the United States by the Trump faction, which are basically also global oriented. They're imperialists, right? But they're grounded in some kind of a national state, right? So Trump wants to make America the predominant political power in the world, over China and etc. But he still very much thinks in terms of categories of the United States, right? Whereas the Democratic Party, which represents this other faction, doesn't really think in terms of categories like the United States. To them, the United States is just a tool that can be, its machinery, its military can be used to further eliminate borders and countries, to permit this kind of new world of faceless, masses of people and machines mixed together and undifferentiated. So there's no gender, there's no differences, or there can be multiples of genders. There can be infinite number of identities, as long as they're not national identities, and as long as they're not some kind of culturally grounded in centuries long traditions. As soon as those things disappear, you can define yourself to be a cat, for example. There was recently a video of a parent who said that her kid was and as long as the class conscious, this is the common thread with the Nazis, right? The Nazis said class struggle doesn't exist. The only thing that's meaningful is race struggle between inferior and superior races. Well, the current liberals are neo-Nazis. They can be classified because they think that the current struggle is not class struggle. It's the struggle between the technologically enhanced humanity, this is where we're going, versus those humans who are obsolete because they're purely biological. So we're in the language of race war.
Can I interrupt you here? Can I interrupt you here and just ask one supplementary question? Because I think that, of course, this question of technology, the question of improving, or I don't know, somehow trying to create this superhuman with technology and all this kind of cheap transhumanist tactics and so on and so forth. That's of course there, obviously, but I think there's one more thing which is also one of the architectures, one of the structures of this division between the good and the evil, between the purely biological and enhanced, and so on and so forth, which is, because you mentioned the question of race, right? And in the past, this used to be fashionable. Like, we are better and we can do this or that because we are racially superior to, to this or that group, to this group of human beings, to that group of human beings, and so on and so forth. Or we are superior because of nationalism and xenophobia. We are superior to this or that nation. We all know that's a kind of passé thing. Like, that's a thing of the past. That's not fashionable anymore. But now I think this division has been substituted by different kind of superiority, which is moral superiority. We are morally superior. The West is morally superior. The United States are morally superior. Thus, they can afford, or they should afford, or they should even demonstrate some kind of exceptionalist tactics, things that apply to them but don't apply to others, or vice versa. So, what do you think about that?
I think, Boyan, I think moral superiority language is just a cheap cover for race categories.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they can't yet openly use racist language in the European Union on the highest political level, because that will potentially still mobilize internal opposition to a degree, but even it would mobilize the Russians even more, because in the Soviet and post-Soviet historiography, the memory of the last racist war is firmly implanted in millions of people's lives who lost relatives. In the war that the Soviet Union lost 27 million people, and including Ukraine. 8 million Ukrainians died in World War II, which is a massive proportion of the total population. So I think the language of moral superiority is just it's just a proxy term for racist language. And we see the racist language. Annalena Baerbock, that stupid, person in charge of very big European countries' foreign ministry, she's the descendants of Nazis, committed Nazis, as the German, media Bild exposed her for some reason. I don't know why they did it. It was like a gift, to the other side. Her grandfather was a committed Nazi. So she comes from a family that was not denazified after World War II. Now, what did she say at one point? She said that what's more important to her than the well-being of the German people, citizens, is the victory of Ukraine over Russia. That's a racist language through other words. She's saying we must prevail at all cost over those other subhumans which are threatening us. What did Borrell said, that moron? What's his title? Josep Borrell. He's the foreign minister of the European
He's
Union.
the commissioner. He's the commissioner. Yeah, the European
Where did
Commissioner
they
for
find
Foreign
this
Affairs.
shit and garbage? I hate to say, despicable people, despicable racists. What did he say a couple of months ago? He said the European Union is a wonderful garden and in the midst of jungles. Who are the jungles? Yeah. Anything outside of Europe, Russia, Africa, Latin America. So in his little mind, Bulgaria, Poland, in his little mind, this insignificant human being is thinking through racist categories, except that he's in a position of power.
And he's a social democrat, mind you.
Well, of course, because social democrats traditionally have been okay with racist politics too in European history. So we are dealing with racists. We're dealing with, I would argue, maybe this would seem a little bit hyperbolic, we're dealing with the Fourth Reich. We're witnessing the reconstitution of the Fourth Reich in the European Union, not through racial categories yet, through financial categories and through racial categories that are hidden, through moral language and through language of jurisprudence. It's not legal to violate borders. Only we can violate borders, but we do it legally. So I think we're reconstituting a racist project, which is not German. It's not German form of racism right now, because the Germans they have no political sovereignty, as we know, because of the blowing up of the gas pipes and the non-reaction by the German government. We're dealing with English forms of racism. As Bozhin was saying, England is the European muscle, has always been. This is an attempt to reconstitute the British Empire. It would fail, of course. Using American military muscles and the American faction of the capitalist ruling elites that is pro-British. This is an old story, right? So I think the real racist language and energy and ideology, population reduction, population control of the deserved people, this is an English war of the English ruling elites in their attempt to reconstitute England as a global empire. Notice the English government's involvement in the Caucasus. They visit Armenia. They pay special attention to Azerbaijan. They're investing a lot of money in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and etc. So this is, I think, on the biggest level of politics, this is an English-led race war against Russia, because that is the big. This is the old battle. This is a battle that's been fought since at least Peter the Great and before Peter the Great. So it's just that it's just waged without explicit racist language. It's using moral language, legal language to replace racist language, because that would mobilize the Russians even more.
Okay, so that's a fascinating analysis. Bozhin, I saw you were nodding your head up and down and right and left, and I wonder, would you like to perhaps reply to some of the comments made by Arto?
Well, I just wanted to mention that this language of moral superiority is nothing new. I mean, it has always been, imperialism has always been justified by a language of moral superiority, like virtue, and we are the virtuous, and we are superior because we are the ones that kind of like know what is virtue, what is propriety, and this and that, and we have to educate these little kids here. There's this. I kept thinking about this famous cartoon from Puck magazine. Puck magazine was this like a magazine in the United States in the 19th and early 20th century with very interesting political cartoons. And there is a political cartoon there where Uncle Sam is scolding the new children, and the new children, of course, the annexed territories of Hawaii, Philippines, Haiti, and so on. And it's such a kind of visual representation of this notion of superiority and this notion of inferior races. So if you were to talk about Nazism and the Third Reich has its roots precisely in this social Darwinism of the British and the Americans, this justification of oppression through the prism of superiority. The superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race that it has to educate, the white man's burden, which is Kipling's poem, White Man's Burden, very well illustrates that. Basically, the notion that we have, by God, we are given this duty. We have this duty, this duty, the duty to civilize the uncivilized. And when it comes also to racism, I don't think that the question of racism is gone. I think it's reversed now. If we are to look at this question of this kind of phenomena of wokeness, and I really like the concept of woke imperialism. I really like this concept of kind of like, again, this superior this superior position that the United States is taking as, we're not racists, we are not sexist, and at the same time continuing their very old imperial practices of grabbing resources, of fomenting various wars, and so on. The CIA inclusion program with the LGBT flags and all this kind of like idiotic things. The commercials recruiting CIA because they're inclusive, because they have lesbians now in the CIA, or because they have like I don't know, trans and this and that, right? So the face of imperialism can be black. Actually, it can be black. If you have some Uncle Tom figure, it can be a black face. Because it really doesn't matter. It will just be a figure there put. Or it could be senile, or it could be, behind a figurehead behind which hides the financial oligarchy and the very same old class that someone like General Smedley Butler identified as the gangster capitalist class, the big business. He said, I was the muscle for big business. In his famous book War is a Racket, which I'm recommending everyone to read. This is a very small short book called War is a Racket, where a general in the United States military is describing his kind of experience having been involved in these various wars, starting with the Philippines, Nicaragua, and so on, when the United States was exercising its hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, in the beginning of the first century, of the 20th century.
I think for anybody if we want to understand what is happening in the European Union, it would be extremely important to study ongoing European Union political structures through the lens of racism, through the lens of race and class, because there are already interesting books published about this. There was a very well-known French historian, I think he's French Jewish historian, and thus he has a justified interest in the study of the Nazis. His name is Chapoteau. He teaches at the University of Paris. He published a short book, Free to Obey. It's translated into English. It's translated into German. I'm not sure, maybe other languages. And in there, very quickly, he shows how the entire senior managerial class of Germany after World War II, and by extension in most of Western Europe, was trained in management principles written and codified by senior SS legal scholars during World War II. The idea was, and thus became the root of the European Union technocratic elites. The idea is that the Nazis in World War II faced a practical problem, which was how to govern over a huge empire with a minimum of available bureaucrats and resources who were of the master race. Because if you occupy the Ukraine and the Soviet Union and the rest of Europe, you're going to deal with Untermenschen. So how is the German Superman going to be able to, a master race, going to be able to govern over this huge territory? They had to invent new ways of governing, new ways of bureaucracies, new ways of enforcing the law, and etc. So SS colonels and generals, legal scholars went to work and start to invent new ways of government. And the idea, just very briefly, they invented what we call neoliberalism. The idea that the state is the problem, like big government agencies that are there forever are a problem. You need small, temporary government structures that only exist for a specific mission. Once this task is accomplished, they disappear. This is the quintessential neoliberal ideology.
Yeah.
And it's
Which,
not,
by the way, makes me sometimes think, sometimes it makes me think that the neoliberals are the only group of ideologically and politically profiled people who really understood the Marxist notion of the state withering away. But they, of course, turned it upside down and applied it in their own way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think when these Nazi war criminals survived, two of them, three of them, their names are in the book. They're very famous business. They founded business schools. And the most famous business schools in Switzerland and Germany were modeled along the new management theories of Nazi politics. And they trained most of the German executive elite in charge of Mercedes-Benz, BASF, et cetera, et cetera.
But
So
the same
we're
thing happens
dealing
in
with
Japan as well. In Japan,
same thing in Japan, yeah.
Yeah,
So
with the
we're
Toyota
dealing with
model, yeah. So
we're dealing with an inadequately denazified European ruling elites who are now in a position, I think, to extract revenge for their father's defeat. I think this is the psychological background to this. So one of the big difference between the current neo-Nazis, or maybe we have to invent a new word for them, because one way in which the current racists in power are different from the Nazis is that the Nazis were grounded in a notion of ethnicity or nationality, the German people and etc. And their goal was to elevate that particular part of Europe in a position of political leadership of the rest of the people in Europe, right? The current racists they see the existence of nationalities or national cultures or the nation state as horrifically obsolete and useless category of politics. And in their view, they want to live in Europe, which is just a geographic label without any of the nation states in it and without those cultural differences between France, Germany, Bulgaria, etc. So to them, they couldn't care less if 45% of Germany in 50 years or whatever consists of people from completely different ethnicities or cultures who are not integrated. They're totally okay with that because to them, the idea of Germany is a meaningless and obsolete construct. So in that sense, if we want to think about the European Union, what is the European Union? The European Union is a supranational confederate form of government whose primary purpose is to legally, continuously subvert and bypass national laws of national states. That's why the European Union was invented, on one level, to fight against European labor unions, European leftist parties. The second purpose was for the European Union is to slowly wither away, as you said, Boyan, although not from a Marxist socialist point of view, to wither away the national states in Europe. That's the primary strategic point. So you create a government in Brussels or whatever with its own bureaucracy, and you train it with civil servants who are completely unaccountable to the local population. And thus, over time, they grow to think of themselves as an independent elite, which is transnational. This is the formation of a transnational government in service of the financial transnational class, with goals of obviously global domination, in the sense that their enemies are anybody who is the opposite view of what is politics, and the only opposite view that exists is the anti-capitalist, socialist, communist systems, and or any other system that is nationally grounded and would institute borders of difference, and anti-imperialist, and would constitute borders which differentiate themselves from the European transnational elite. So I think if you read it in that sense, uncontrolled and encouraged migration in Europe makes perfect sense, because the idea is to dilute. You can almost see it. The idea is to dilute and make irrelevant national differences, and thus cultural differences within the European continent, as essentially meaningless. I think if you want to read it in that sense, then unrestricted migration from places that are very different and very far away, and thus very difficult to absorb in the European economy, makes perfect sense. In Bulgaria, this would be catastrophic, because Bulgaria, unlike Russia, unlike the United States, or unlike France, unlike any formerly imperial and or multi-ethnic, multinational state, Bulgaria was very different. And Bulgaria has had a history of toleration in general to different ethnicities that coexisted. But the ethnicities that live in Bulgaria are a remnant from the Ottoman imperial period. So in Bulgaria, you have Bulgarians, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews, and Turks, right? And Roma people. This is the population that existed in the Ottoman Empire for centuries as well. So when you have migration in Bulgarian history, for example, when the Bulgarian government absorbed a large number of Armenians during the Balkan War and the Armenian, genocide and etc., events that happened during the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, when it was falling apart into different parts. Armenians arriving in Bulgaria, Bulgarians arriving in Bulgaria from parts that fell outside of the Bulgarian state. These were migrations of a completely qualitatively different nature. These were essentially the same people who had a different, or Turks in Bulgaria. These are culturally the same people who only differed in religion. So that's a completely different pattern of migration. Or immigration, Bulgarians or Greeks moving from Bulgaria to Greece, or Turks moving from Bulgaria to Turkey. These are movements that are within more or less similar cultural and formations that had differences, but the differences were far less pronounced than the large-scale importation of Syrian refugees into Germany. Now, the next question is, why are Syrian people or Afghani refugees? These are people whose world was destroyed. Who was it destroyed by? By the European Union. In part of its alliance with the United States-led interventions in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So in one sense, this is, okay, you destroyed my homeland. Now I'm going to come back to live in your homeland, because where else am I going to go, etc. So that's a justifiable claim. But on the other hand, I think the permission of unrestricted immigration of vastly different people who are not integrated is a conscious choice by the transnational capitalist elites, who have no use for national differences in Europe anymore. And the European Union was invented, in my view, to accelerate this process. But we must add just a quick footnote here, because it's very important, I think, the story that Bozhin is presenting. There are 387,000 Ukrainians in Bulgaria. I saw a graphic, I think it was in the Financial Times. I don't know if that's the real number, but it's a huge amount relative the Bulgarian population of 6 million. But we must say here that Bulgaria has previously accepted refugees from wars. And for example, in 1973, after the fascist coup in Chile, there was a large number of Chilean people, political refugees, who were willingly accepted by the Bulgarian government, and they lived here. Some of them stayed here forever, didn't go back. Some of them stayed and went back to Chile after the Pinochet regime was destroyed or removed from power. But that was approached completely differently by the Bulgarian government then, by the socialist government. There were public press conferences. Everybody in the country knew who these people were. Why were they brought over? They understood what was happening in Chile. This is happening secretly. Which suggests that it's not legitimate. That's why it's being secret. This is happening for reasons that don't really make sense, right, to the average Bulgarian. So I think it's not to say that Bulgaria as a society is not open to accept foreigners because they've never done that. Bulgaria has a long history of accepting refugees of different kinds, but this is an artificial, qualitatively different situation. It's typical European Union bureaucratic, transnational nonsense. It's deeply anti-democratic because it's in secret. The local population has no idea of the numbers. We have no idea what's happening with Schengen. Who are the people, the refugees that are coming in? Do we have a say in that as a government, as a citizens, to vote yes or no? This is incredibly anti-democratic. And I think that's why a lot of people are not feeling good about it.
But I think there's also one other element that is often skipped by those people who praise and cherish this kind of waves of uncontrolled migration, because they always base themselves on like, oh, you don't want to accept, foreigners and refugees and people from other cultures because you are racist, bigoted, and so on and so forth. And that's of course like, by and large, it's not the case. I mean, there is a problem of course, racism and bigotry and so on and so forth in Europe, in Bulgaria, in Poland, and many other places. But this is not the fundamental problem when it comes to migration. It's people, like especially in Poland and Bulgaria, and I can see that, and it's so in plain sight that you can see that people don't want it because it's enforced on them. Not because that, like, because they are somehow against, receiving people who require help because they come from war zones and something like that. It's because it's enforced on them, and it's enforced with this kind of rhetoric that, oh, we are morally superior, and from our morally superior standpoint, we tell you that you have to have them. And we will even mathematically split it up, right? Like, you're going to have this amount, they're going to have this amount, and this is what they discussed recently, even the European Commission. So I think this is a very important problem. But there's also one more element, and before I let you speak again, Bozhin, I just want to make that point that now, like, you cannot make any comparison between Chile in the early 70s and the political refugees from that moment, from that period, because those refugees, those waves of refugees, that was politically organized for a reason and by entities that trusted each other. There was a communist party here, a socialist party there, I don't know, a ring of socialist partisans here and there throughout, Latin America. And through those structures, the Chileans, the repressed Chilean communist socialists, and so on and so forth, some of them made their way to Bulgaria, and they were welcome in Bulgaria. And as you said, Arto, public conferences, statements, festivals, even if you like, everything, right? That was it. Whereas now, now we have criminally involved large groups of people who just professionally, in a profoundly criminal manner, smuggle people.
When we going back to the Chilean refugees, when most likely these were leftists, most likely these were highly educated people. So it doesn't even matter. It's just that the fact of the matter is that these people are running away from an oppressive regime, and they are not really posing any kind of. They're not really likely to create some kind of a dangerous situation in their host countries. Whereas we don't know that with the Ukrainians, who might, again, many of them might be have been participating in various criminal activities, and judging by what has been,
Or pogroms against the Russians.
yeah, right. That's what I mean. Forms of pogroms, war crimes, and so on. With this, like, again, this is just rumors, but that there are here, that there are Azov battalion soldiers here in Bulgaria that are, being treated in Bulgarian hospitals and so on. I don't know if this is the case or not.
This is just another way of destabilizing the old regime, which is the nation state system. And a parallel would be to the farmers in Poland. So, for example, why are the Polish farmers, as I understand it, upset? Because they understand very well that Ukraine, being the largest country in Europe after Russia, territory-wise, and having the largest proportion of arable land for farming purposes, if the European Union joins if Ukraine joins the European Union, it would be the number one agricultural powerhouse. So they understand that transnational capitalist elites that have legally bought most of the arable land in Ukraine, which is something that people may not know, and our listeners, Ukrainian agricultural production is currently being dumped on the European markets. And by doing that at a lower price than, for example, Polish agriculture, it is very clear that the European Union doesn't give a shit about the livelihood of Polish farmers, even if they're large to medium scale farmers.
It's also highly dangerous. This in a war zone.
Yeah, because it comes from a war zone. It has depleted uranium and etc.
Yeah, right.
So the point is, though, it's this deliberate.
And the norms, of course, even the official norms, let alone depleted uranium, but even the official norms for agricultural cultivation are much lower in Ukraine than in the European Union.
And even though they were much higher during the Soviet period, as we know, but that's a different story. That's another interesting story. But the point is, this is a deliberate, calculated strategy by the transnational nature of the European elites in order to, for example, dismantle Polish agriculture as a political force, dismantle Belgian agriculture, French agriculture, whatever agriculture in the European Union as a political force by making them unemployed. So I think this is another step in the kind of deliberate dismantling of already existing, long-standing political divisions, practices, cultures on the European continent under the rubric of humanitarian intervention, whatever you want to use, whatever ideological framework you want to use. So I think we should read mass and controlled migration into Europe to function the same political purpose as the dumping of Ukrainian agricultural production. They both end the same goal is destabilization of the political system as it exists by destroying the social fabric. Previous things that exist now are designed to be illogical, wrong, oppressive, and thus unsustainable economically, etc. So we're witnessing large-scale social engineering in the European Union to the detriment of the majority of the working classes that exist in that continent. So it's a monstrous project.
And I want to point out also, when it comes, just final thought, when it comes to the question of the refugees, to the hypocrisy of this whole process, because I know for a fact, I have been having personal contacts that is absolutely extremely difficult for Palestinian refugees now to come to the country, and the hell that they have to go through to stay in Bulgaria, which is absolutely incredibly hypocritical, because the Palestinians right now are, if there is a people that are really in need of some kind of shelter and of some kind of support and help, refuge, yes, these are the literally, yes, and the Bulgarian government is doing everything possible to make it difficult and horrible experience for them to stay here, which once again shows that this is a political kind of, like, yes, a political strategy. It has nothing to do with humanitarian support, with nothing to do, it's not coming from humanitarian reasons. Yes,
I invited you, both of you are Bulgarian researchers and analysts and political commentators, and can we just draw a little bit the context of the discussion, because we've had this incident that turned out to be pretty scandalous in Bulgaria, where a certain prominent public figure, I'm not going to name his name because it's not going to ring any bells throughout our audience, but there is this, they call him national security specialist, who went a couple of days ago, was it, or maybe a week ago, he went to the airport in Sofia, in the capital city of Bulgaria, and he said there are going to be planes landing here carrying refugees whom he, refugees or migrants, I can't remember the exact words or terms that he used, but he also said that those people are they present some kind of danger, some kind of, problem vis-a-vis the national security of Bulgaria, and he started throwing around accusations that they are criminals or people who are unidentified but are suspected of being criminals, parts of gangs and parts of criminal groupings back in their countries, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't know to what extent those accusations were actually investigated and maybe proven legit or false, or I don't know. But fact of the matter is that they tried to discredit him by saying, oh no, nothing like that is happening. And then he just turned out at the airport in Sofia, and they were not able to basically get away with this, because he pointed out, he said, this plane, those people, this many people, and so on and so forth. So I wonder whether you could give me a brief overview of what has actually happened and what was how was it echoing within the Bulgarian public, and what were the reactions?
I mean, I heard about it through my friends actually, who were commenting. Which my friends are just, they're just working people. They're not members of government or anything. So it must be entering the popular kind of imagination. People are hearing about it. This particular commentator is very active on media. I believe he's a colonel and he's a professor teaching Markov, teaching national security actually at one of the universities in Sofia. So he's clearly somebody from inside, the power structures of the government. So he must know the information because he's an intelligence officer. I mean, he or linked to very very. He's an active officer. I mean, he's on duty. He's not retired. I think to me this means up until now, Bulgaria has managed to avoid this kind of transnational further destabilization of the social fabric. And now this is a deliberate attempt by those transnational elites through their servants in Brussels or the European Union to introduce in Bulgaria that aspect of political and social destabilization. So I think this is basically how I understand the situation. It's like, so far you avoided it, but now we're going to force this element into your society.
This is in the context of the fact that once again this government is there is no transparency when it comes to this government. Everything is done in secret, and there is now speculation with certain numbers. How many refugees? What has been agreed upon? Like what kind of green light did the government give to to this directive coming from, of course, from Austria, because Austria was one of the most kind of uh, was insisting on this situation with bringing in refugees here, and there are these speculations. So there are different numbers that are floating around the public sphere, like 16,000. Some say, but at first the talk was about 6,000. So we don't even know if there is any kind of a quota, or basically there's going to be indefinite flux of refugees. We have no idea. Like, the public has no idea. Everything is speculation because there's nothing official. And of course, this is going to fuel all kinds of rumors and all kinds of attempts on part of various activists, like this person who has been also vocal about the destruction of historical sites, like the monuments and so on. He's being active in this as well, and part of various investigative journalists to get to the truth, what is going on, how what has been agreed, what kind of agreement has been signed, right? So and once again, this is just, this all comes because of Schengen, which is an unpopular, which not even it's not even it was supposed to bring the support, the public support, but the only support that it has brought is this like minuscule percentage of Euro-Atlantic liberals that are kind of like,
Yeah, and let's just say what Schengen is, because many of our viewers are from Canada and the United States, and they might
yeah,
not be aware of that. So Schengen is a kind of contract, kind of agreement within the European Union, where you don't have to even show your passport at the border. You can just, move as if it's not in another country, but in another neighborhood. You just go ahead and cross the border. And Bulgaria and Romania, and I believe, I don't know, maybe one or two other countries in the European Union are still out of this Schengen area. But now Bulgaria is being teased into getting into this Schengen area. And some people, especially the government, are trying to present it as if this is some kind of major success. But like, no one is really demanding this. No one is really keen about that idea. I mean, of course, some people maybe, yeah, like those who travel a lot. But this is nothing. This is not going to solve any of the substantial actual problems that the
but it's
Bulgarians are facing at
precisely
the
the
moment.
transnational
Arto.
capitalist, a small percentage of Bulgarians who think themselves of part of this transnational capitalist class that are going to benefit from that, right? It's precisely the
Right,
technocrats, the bankers, these people would benefit from that. No one else will benefit. And if the price for not staying in line to show your passport is flooding a country with refugees, I mean, that's absurd. Of course, absurd. Of course, normal, like everyday working Bulgarians are not going to agree with this. Are not going to like think of it as some kind of
yeah, sure,
fair deal.
sure. I totally agree with you. Okay, so Bozhin, Arto, actually, I want to turn to you now, and please let us know what your take on that is, but also perhaps make some closing remarks for our program today, because we really need to wrap it up.
Well, I mean, the Schengen thing, I think, yeah, I think it would most benefit on one level the Bulgarians who don't want to consider themselves Bulgarians anymore. This kind of new trans-European, transnationals, elites who love going to Vienna, and you're like, that's real culture and that's real Europe. We are just barbarians. This kind of self-internalized self-hate, which is the most despicable people you can possibly imagine, because the Austrians will never consider them Austrians or Europeans. I mean, those elites, they're still going to see them as Untermenschen. But and it's also going to encourage further exploitation of the Bulgarian working classes. As Bulgaria, if the Bulgarian economy under the leadership of these servants of capital, of transnational capital, continues to disintegrate or deteriorate over time, more and more Bulgarian working people are going to be forced to take advantage of Schengen and to go work as minimum wage labor or any kind of labor in Germany or in Austria or anything that pays higher, further diluting and kind of, because again, the European Union is not some kind of a United States of America or the Russian Federation. It's not some kind of a place with a common to all culture and etc. It's not that, because that aspect of Europeanness is not being fostered, is not being encouraged. Essentially, it's just a labor market for people to sell their labor power from all around Europe for the benefit of the wealthy capitalists. So, in that sense, I think that's what these maneuvers are for. But in general, I think we're living in a very dangerous time, where, to me, the biggest danger is the possibility of nuclear war because of uh, inherent racism that's very strongly felt against the Russians as a people, which might be in the heads of some of these transnational elites. And hopefully it won't be. So to me, that's the biggest danger to avoid. And I do agree that the Russians are showing extreme restraint to these provocations by the French president, for example. These are provocations. I can't even imagine any previous historical point in Europe. You can't even imagine Hitler saying such things. Even Hitler didn't say publicly in a press conference, we're going to kill all the Jews and all the Slavs. That's our point. And we're going to occupy the Soviet Union and convert it into colonies. Even Hitler didn't say that openly as chancellor. But the French president is saying openly that he's going to send troops to fight against the Russians.
He's considering that, yeah.
He's considering that, yeah. So I think we're in very dangerous times, and I really hope we avoid a situation of nuclear war in which we'll all perish
and
for
that's
no
and
reason.
I gotta tell you, yeah, I gotta tell you that the most paradoxical thing about the the current situation is, because I share the fear that you just expressed, Arto, that we can just evaporate in one big or a series of huge nuclear blasts. That's true, and
Yeah.
I have children, I want to have grandchildren, and
Yeah.
all the rest of it, right? I share that fear totally. I'm totally with you on that. But the most paradoxical thing about it is that the man who's being demonized and described as crazy and aggressive and pathological in all kinds of ways, which is, the current resident of the Kremlin, of course, he is, rational people's only hope, because he is really leading an administration of people who understand that they are dealing with nutcases on the other side of the Atlantic and on the other side of the Ural. I mean, that's just the situation today. That you have to really count on those who are presented as the worst enemies of humanity and everything, because they are at least mentally stable. You might disagree with them politically on many aspects, but they are mentally stable. They know where they're going, and they understand the situation that they're in, which is they are placed. They have to confront the madhouse of Western politics.
They
This is the
understand that
situation.
words make a difference, right? People communicate
Yeah.
and make judgments by speaking and
Right.
hearing what other
Right.
people tell them.
Right.
So if you're going to say that you are willing to enlarge the war and you represent a government with nuclear powers, what are you saying? If you are the French president who say you might send troops to fight the Russian military, and you are a nuclear power, that means potentially you're going to use nuclear weapons, right? I mean, that's the logical consequence. So the response to that would be massive elevation of the danger of nuclear war. So if you
That's
say
true.
these words and you're not aware of these consequences, what does that say about you?
Yeah, you should not be a politician, for sure. That's one thing that it definitely says. So on this more positive, I hope, note, we can end this program today. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you guys. It's always great to host you, and I hope to see you in our virtual studio once again relatively soon. Thanks,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
see you in the next segments. Bye.